The first of Lydia Mercer's blue chairs was already in the sale yard when she learned that she had been dismissed. A footman had set it beside a stack of kitchen stools, where its faded upholstery looked almost grey beneath the pale Hampshire sun. The second came moments later in the arms of a stable boy who plainly wished to be anywhere else. Lydia stopped at the edge of the gravel. Beyond the chairs stood a narrow writing table, 2 shelves, a coal scuttle, a brass candlestick, and the little wooden box in which Tenants had left petitions when she was away from Cedar Cottage. Each item bore a paper number tied with string. Lot 17. She looked at the card again, then at the chairs. Those chairs had stood opposite each other in the front room of Cedar Cottage for nearly 7 years. Lydia had always kept one beside her desk and one facing it. No tenant who came with a leaking roof, a dead cow, a sick wife, or 3 frightened children was required to stand while explaining hardship. "Sit first," she would say, "then tell me what has happened." Apparently, Rosemead had found even that arrangement extravagant. Miss Mercer. Mr. Fabian Croft approached with a ledger tucked beneath one arm. The Duke's senior steward was a spare man with a clean collar, a careful smile, and the irritating habit of speaking as though every cruelty had already been approved by arithmetic. "I had hoped someone would tell you before the furniture was brought out." "Someone has now." His smile thinned. Lydia's gaze moved to the long table beneath the portico, where several disposal papers had been arranged for His Grace's review. "And Cedar Cottage, to be closed as an estate office. My position?" Croft hesitated just long enough to make the answer insulting. "Discontinued." Lydia felt the words like cold water down her back. Around the yard, servants found reasons to examine ropes, wheels, buckles, anything but her face. Near the outer gate, 3 tenant farmers waited with hats in hand. Among them stood Thomas Bell of Lower Mead Farm, broad-shouldered and grey-haired, his expression hardening as he looked from Lydia to the chairs. Croft lowered his voice. "His Grace has concluded that too many informal arrangements survived from the late Duke's administration. Rosemead requires discipline. His Grace concluded that. He signed the authorization himself. That hurt more than she expected. Not because Henry Montford, Duke of Bellcaster, had ever promised her anything. He had not. He had inherited Rosemead 11 months earlier and spent most of that time reducing costs, dismissing unnecessary retainers, and replacing old habits with systems Croft called modern efficiencies. Lydia had met him perhaps a dozen times. He had always been correct with her, never unkind enough to accuse, never interested enough to ask. She looked toward the portico. Henry stood there now. He was taller than most men around him, dressed in dark riding clothes rather than London finery. One hand resting on the edge of the table as Croft's clerk spoke near his shoulder. He had the contained stillness of a man accustomed to decisions becoming facts simply because he had made them. Then he saw Lydia. For one brief instant, his expression changed. Not guilt, recognition, as though he had only just understood that the name on his paper possessed a face. Lydia crossed the yard. The gravel seemed unnaturally loud beneath her shoes. Croft followed. "Miss Mercer," he murmured, "there is no need to make this public." She nearly smiled. The chairs were in the sale yard. Her desk was numbered. 3 tenants were watching. The public part had already been arranged. Henry dismissed his clerk as she approached. "Miss Mercer, Your Grace," she curtsied, perfectly. If she was to be removed from Rosemead, she would not give Croft the satisfaction of seeing her forget who she was before she left it. Henry glanced toward the furniture. "I assume, Mr. Croft has explained the change." "He has explained that Cedar Cottage is to close, my position is discontinued, and the furniture is to be sold." His jaw tightened slightly at her precision. "That is correct." Lydia drew one slow breath. "Did you intend all 3? Behind Henry, Croft shifted. Henry did not. Yes, there it was. No mystery to soften it. Lydia looked down at the authorization lying before him. Henry's signature was unmistakable at the foot of the page. He followed her gaze. "The estate cannot continue upon sentimental arrangements," he said. "My father permitted too many offices to exist without clear necessity. Did you ask what necessity this one served?" A dangerous quiet settled between them. Croft spoke quickly. "Miss Mercer, His Grace is not required to account for every—" Henry lifted one hand. Croft fell silent. Henry's attention remained on Lydia. "No," he said. It was the first honest thing anyone had offered her that morning. Lydia nodded once. "Then I have my answer." She reached into the pocket of her dark green pelisse and withdrew the 2 keys to Cedar Cottage. The larger opened the front door. The smaller opened the petition box, now sitting beneath Lot 17. She placed them beside the disposal sheet. Henry's hand moved at the same moment, perhaps to steady the paper against the breeze. Their gloved fingers touched. It lasted less than a second. Lydia withdrew first. She felt the contact anyway, not tenderness, not yet. Only the startling awareness that the hand capable of signing away her place at Rosemead was warm. Croft cleared his throat. "There is another possibility, Miss Mercer. A room might be found above the west servants' wing until you determine your next situation." Lydia turned toward him. "A servant's room? You are without accommodation. I am also a gentleman's daughter." No insult was intended. Then none need be accepted. Thomas Bell lowered his head abruptly, but not before Lydia saw the flash of approval in his eyes. Henry saw it too. She knew because his gaze moved from Bell back to her. A younger tenant had edged closer while they spoke. Samuel Price, whose cottage roof had leaked through most of August, stood clutching his cap. "Miss Mercer?" Croft frowned. "This is hardly the time." Lydia looked at Samuel. "Yes, my petition. You said Mr. Croft's office would answer before Michaelmas." Croft's mouth hardened. Lydia's own humiliation could wait 10 seconds. "Take another copy to the main estate office," she told Samuel quietly. "Address it to the Duke's secretary, not merely the steward's room. State that the south rafters are worsening. Do not leave without a receipt." Samuel nodded as though she had handed him a rope over deep water. "Thank you, miss." He retreated. Only then did Lydia notice Henry watching her with an expression she could not read. She turned back to him. "I shall remove my personal things from Cedar Cottage before dusk, Your Grace. You need not leave today. Mr. Croft has numbered my chairs." A faint color rose along Henry's cheekbones. Lydia curtsied again. This one was shallower, final. As she walked towards Cedar Cottage, she heard no one call her back. She had almost reached the gate when Thomas Bell spoke behind her. He did not speak loudly. He did not need to. His Grace may find, the old tenant said, that he's sold more than 2 chairs today. 3 days later, Henry Montford learned that a duke could command silence far more easily than obedience. The rent room at Rosemead had been prepared before breakfast. Mr. Croft sat at the long oak table with the estate books open before him. 2 clerks waited with sharpened pens. A fire burned low in the grate, despite the mild autumn morning. And the first tenants had begun arriving before the clock struck 9. Nothing about them suggested rebellion. That was what unsettled Henry most. They came properly dressed for business. Men removed their hats. Women who held tenancies in widowhood carried folded papers in neat bundles. Several had leather purses heavy enough to show plainly that they had not come empty-handed. Thomas Bell entered first. He bowed. "Your Grace." Bell. Thomas stepped to the table and placed a brown leather purse directly in front of Croft. The steward extended his hand. Thomas rested his palm over the purse. Croft looked at him. "Your rent, mister." Bell. "It is. Then kindly surrender it." "No." One of the clerks stopped writing. Henry remained standing beside the mantel. "Explain yourself." Thomas turned to him. "I owe Rosemead every shilling in that purse, Your Grace. Yet you refuse to pay it. I refuse to hand it over today." Croft pushed back his chair. "That distinction is nonsense. No, sir. It is the distinction between debt and trust. Henry's attention sharpened. Behind Thomas, another tenant entered, then another. Each greeted Henry with proper respect. Each placed a purse, packet, or folded rent note upon the table. None opened it. Within half an hour, the oak surface held enough money to make the silence in the room feel almost absurd. Croft's composure began to crack. This is coordinated defiance. Thomas glanced toward the others. It is coordinated, yes. Croft gave a cold laugh. Miss Mercer has been busy. No, the answer came from 3 places at once. Henry looked toward the doorway. Samuel Price, the young tenant Lydia had helped in the sale yard, stepped forward. Miss Mercer told me my rent was owed, Your Grace. She said so plain. A widow near the back nodded. She told me the same. Thomas added. She told all of us to meet our obligations. Then why are you not doing so? Henry asked. Thomas's gaze did not waver. Because we are asking you to meet yours. The room went still. Croft rose. Your Grace, this is insolence, if you permit. Henry held up one hand. Croft stopped. Henry looked from face to face. No shouting, no drunken anger. No tenant seemed eager for spectacle. That made the matter more serious. What exactly are you asking? Thomas drew a folded paper from inside his coat. Only that you hear us before Mr. Croft starts calling us disloyal for remembering what Miss Mercer did here. Henry said nothing. Thomas continued. She read petitions no one else read. She knew which widow needed time and which man was trying to cheat the estate. She told us no when no was deserved. She told Mr. Croft no when he wanted things done quickly and wrong. Croft's expression hardened. That woman held no authority. No, Thomas said. That may be the trouble. A murmur moved through the room and died almost at once. Henry's jaw tightened. Are you refusing rent until Miss Mercer is restored? No. Thomas surprised him. We are refusing until she is heard. The distinction landed harder than accusation. Henry looked again at the purses. The tenants were not denying ownership. They were not pretending poverty. They were placing what they owed within reach and withholding the final act of trust. Croft leaned closer. This must be stopped immediately. Notices can be prepared by noon. Penalties should begin today, before this spreads. Henry turned his head. No, Croft blinked. Your Grace, there will be no penalties today, but no notices to quit, no additional charges, no threats made in my name while I determine how this began. Croft's face lost color. Henry's voice dropped. And no one in this room is to be intimidated for having spoken. Thomas Bell lowered his eyes, though not before Henry saw relief pass over his face. Henry pointed toward the rent purses. Take them back. No one moved. I am not confiscating money you have not surrendered. That produced a stir. Slowly, tenants reclaimed the purses. Thomas picked up his last. Will you hear Miss Mercer then? Henry looked toward the windows. Beyond them, the roofs of Little Hensley were visible through bare branches. Yes. Croft stepped toward him. Your Grace, surely you do not intend to go to her. Henry met his gaze. I do. He left before Croft could answer. Lydia was staying with Mrs. Anne Pritchard in a narrow brick house near the village church. Henry knew this only because his secretary had told him. That knowledge irritated him. 3 days earlier, he had possessed the power to remove Lydia Mercer from her home. Until that morning, he had not known where she slept afterward. Mrs. Pritchard received him in a front parlor that was too small for his height and too warm from an enthusiastic fire. Lydia stood when he entered. She wore a plain brown gown, no green pelisse, no estate keys at her waist. The absence struck him unexpectedly. Your Grace, Miss Mercer. Mrs. Pritchard looked between them. I'll see whether the kettle has boiled, Lydia said. It boiled 5 minutes ago. Yes, well, perhaps it requires supervision. The older woman disappeared. For a moment, neither Lydia nor Henry spoke. Then Lydia said, Something has happened. It was not a question. Henry almost smiled at that, but the day had given him little right to amusement. The tenants came to pay their rents. Her expression changed. And they brought the money. She waited. They refused to hand it over. Lydia closed her eyes briefly. Not triumph, alarm. I told them not to do that. I know. Her eyes opened. Henry continued. They were very clear on that point. She crossed to the small tea table and reached for the pot. Her fingers looked cold. Henry noticed the faint stiffness in them, and without thinking much about it, moved the tray closer to the fire before she poured. He did not touch her. Lydia glanced at the tray, then at him. Neither mentioned the gesture. What did Mr. Croft do? She asked. He recommended immediate penalties. And you? I refused. That stopped her. I suspended penalties. I forbade notices to quit. No tenant is to be threatened while I investigate. A long silence followed. Then Lydia poured tea. You acted quickly. I should have acted earlier. Her hand paused over the cup. Henry heard the admission after it left his mouth and realized he meant more than the morning's disturbance. Lydia set the pot down. What do they want? They say they want you heard. A shadow crossed her face. That is not the same as wanting me restored. No, good. Henry frowned. You do not want your position back. I want to understand whether it was ever a position at all. He thought of Cedar Cottage, the chairs, the keys on the paper. Explain. Lydia looked toward the window. For 7 years, people brought questions to that room because they believed someone would answer. Not always favorably. Sometimes the answer was no, but they were answered, and Croft did not answer them. I do not know what he answered. You worked under him. I worked beside the gaps he left. Henry absorbed that. Why would hundreds of tenants risk their farms for you? Lydia looked back at him. There was no satisfaction in her face, only something tired and steady. Perhaps because I never asked them to risk anything for me. Outside, the church bell struck the quarter hour. Henry remained where he was. For the first time since inheriting Rosemead, he understood that the estate contained a form of authority no title had granted him. And somehow, 3 days ago, he had ordered it removed. Henry returned to Rosemead before noon and asked for every tenant petition received during the previous 6 months. Mr. Croft answered too quickly. They have all been resolved, Your Grace. Henry removed his gloves, 1 finger at a time. Then, it should be simple to show me how. Croft stood on the opposite side of the estate office desk. Behind him, pigeonholes climbed nearly to the ceiling, each marked in a clerk's careful hand. Leases, repairs, remissions, boundary matters, timber drainage. For the first time, Henry wondered how many decisions had disappeared into those compartments before reaching him. The routine petitions do not require your personal attention, Croft said. I did not ask whether they required it. A pause. No, Your Grace. I asked to see them. Croft inclined his head. A clerk was sent for 2 bundles. Henry opened the first himself. The top petition concerned a broken byre door. Beneath it lay a request from a widow for 3 weeks' grace after the death of a mayor. The next concerned a collapsed field drain. Each bore a notation in Croft's hand. Resolved, resolved. Henry turned several pages. What was done about Mrs. Greeley's drain? Croft glanced at the sheet. The matter was judged unnecessary. That is not what resolved means. It means the matter was concluded. To whom? Croft's face remained polite. To the estate. Henry looked at him for several seconds. Send for Miss Mercer. Croft's mouth tightened. She is no longer in your service. I am aware of what I did. That ended the discussion. Lydia arrived an hour later with Mrs. Pritchard's maid as temporary escort, though the older woman herself had plainly insisted on sending someone with her. Henry received Lydia in the estate office, rather than the drawing room. He wanted no illusion that this was a social call. She saw the petitions at once. You found them, some of them. Her expression sharpened. Henry drew out the widow's request. Did this come through Cedar Cottage? Yes. And what did you recommend? That Mrs. Greeley be allowed 3 weeks. Her eldest son was due home from Portsmouth, and she had a cow ready for sale. She could pay. She could not pay on the original day. Croft, still present near the shelves, said, "It is not the estate's purpose to manage every domestic inconvenience." Lydia turned her head. "No, it is the estate's purpose to distinguish inconvenience from inability." Henry watched Croft rather than Lydia. "What happened?" Croft answered. "The rent was ultimately paid." "After what?" "Silence," Lydia said. "She sold the cow early." Croft gave her a cold look. She met her obligation. At a loss, Henry looked down at the petition, and that was marked resolved. Lydia did not answer. She did not need to. They spent less than half an hour with the papers. Henry stopped himself before the office became a tribunal of minor tragedies. One example was enough to establish negligence. A second established pattern. Then he found Samuel Price's roof petition, the same young tenant who had spoken to Lydia in the sale yard. Henry read it twice. A leak above the south room, 2 rafters softened. Lydia had written a short recommendation in the margin before the paper reached Croft's office. Repair immediately. Timber cost modest. Delay likely to damage inner plaster and adjoining beam. Across the bottom, Croft had written, "Deferred. Expense unwarranted." Attached to the petition was a later bill for emergency repairs. Henry's eyes narrowed. £36, Croft said. The damage worsened. Lydia leaned nearer, but did not touch the bill. What was the original estimate? Croft did not answer. Henry found a smaller slip attached behind the petition. £12. No one spoke. Henry closed the bundle. One inflated repair charge does not prove fraud. Lydia met his eyes. No, but it proves that the judgment dismissed as sentimental would have saved the estate money. Yes. Croft moved toward the door. If your grace means to question every administrative decision I have made, I mean to question enough of them. Croft stopped. Henry's voice remained quiet. You may go. The steward bowed stiffly and left. Lydia watched the door close. You have made an enemy. I suspect I already had one. I merely failed to know it. That brought the faintest change to her face. Not amusement. Respect, perhaps. Henry folded Samuel Price's petition and slid it into his coat. Come with me. She lifted an eyebrow. Where? To see whether £12 became 36 because Mr. Price owns a particularly vindictive roof. Samuel's farm stood less than half an hour from Rosemead, beyond a lane narrowed by hedges and autumn mud. Henry took a horse. Lydia came in a small estate gig with the same maid, who remained with the vehicle once they reached the farmhouse. Samuel met them beside the barn, startled, almost speechless at the sight of the Duke. The damage was worse than Henry expected. Rain had stained the plaster of the south room. One beam showed darkening near the joint. Samuel removed his cap. Miss Mercer told me in July it ought to be done before harvest. You submitted the petition, Henry asked. Twice, Your Grace, and received an answer. Samuel hesitated. No, sir. Henry looked toward Lydia. Twice? She nodded. I sent the second myself. Samuel rubbed his thumb along the edge of his cap. Miss Weller at North Farm sent 3 about his ditch. Never heard back. Mrs. Greeley sent 1 after her mare died. Mr. Shaw sent 2 over the lower bridge. Henry felt something inside him settle into anger. Not loud anger, worse. Controlled. Croft's records say these matters were resolved. Samuel stared at him. Resolved how? That question followed Henry out of the cottage. They crossed the yard toward the lane, where recent rain had broken the packed earth into deep ruts. Lydia stepped around one and nearly lost her footing where the ground fell sharply beside a cart track. Henry reached out, then stopped himself before taking her arm. He offered his hand instead. Lydia looked at it. For a second, neither moved. The moment was absurdly small after rent refusals, dismissals, and evidence of mismanagement. Yet Henry felt the weight of it. He did not command. He waited. Lydia placed her gloved hand in his. Her fingers settled across his palm. He steadied her over the broken ground, careful not to pull. When she reached firm earth, he released her at once. Thank you, she said. You are welcome. They walked several paces before Lydia spoke again. "You did not have to come here yourself." "Yes," Henry said. "I did." She glanced at him. Ahead, Samuel remained near the cottage door. Behind them, Rosemead's fields stretched toward the distant line of trees. Henry looked down at the petition still in his hand. "How many people told you they never received answers?" Lydia considered. "Enough that I stopped believing it was chance." Henry turned back toward the farmhouse. "Then I want names." Lydia's expression grew grave. "Be careful what you ask for, Your Grace." "Why?" "Because once they speak, you will have to decide whether you were misled." She paused. "Or whether you preferred not to know." The lower bridge at Shaw's Holding had not collapsed. That was the first thing Henry noticed. The second was that it had come very close. One of the supporting timbers had split along the grain, and 2 tenant labourers had braced the span with rough-cut posts to keep carts from breaking through. Beyond it lay 3 fields already stripped for autumn, their furrows dark beneath a pale sky. Mr. Shaw stood beside the bridge with his cap in both hands. "I sent word in June, Your Grace." Henry looked toward Lydia. She said nothing. That silence had become more uncomfortable to him than accusation. "Through Cedar Cottage?" he asked. "Yes, Your Grace. Miss Mercer wrote it down herself." "And afterward?" "Nothing." Henry crouched beside the damaged timber. He had enough practical knowledge to see that the repair would once have been simple. Now it would require new supports and partial replacement of the span. "What did Croft's office tell you?" Mr. Shaw shifted uneasily. "That no work had been approved." Lydia spoke at last. "I recommended repair before harvest." Henry looked at her. "You remember that?" "I remember most petitions when someone's livelihood depends upon the answer." Mr. Shaw lowered his eyes. Henry stood. "Leave us for a moment." The tenant bowed and withdrew toward the barn. Henry waited until he was out of hearing. "This is the 3rd example in 2 days." "Yes, you expected more." "I feared more." He turned toward the fields. For nearly a year, Croft had placed columns before him. Necessary expenditure, unnecessary expenditure, productive tenancy, weak tenancy, repair worth undertaking, repair better deferred. Henry had that governing an estate required hardness because softness had nearly destroyed one. "My father left Bellcaster in worse condition than anyone outside the family knew." Lydia looked at him. This was not the answer she had expected. Henry continued before he could reconsider. He borrowed against future rents, delayed repairs because he disliked unpleasant decisions, forgave debts without recording them, then demanded payment without warning when creditors pressed him. By the time I understood the extent of it, half his kindness had become negligence, and the other half had become confusion. Lydia listened without interrupting. "I spent years putting numbers where he had left promises," Henry said. "I learned to distrust arrangements that depended upon memory, affection, or private judgment, because his judgment was poor. Yes, that does not mean judgment itself is the danger." Henry turned toward her. She stood near the hedgerow in her brown walking dress, one gloved hand resting lightly against the top rail of the gate. There was no triumph in her expression. She was not pleased to have been proven right. That, somehow, made him more willing to hear her. "What is the danger, then?" "Ignorance." The word was quiet. Henry's mouth tightened. Lydia went on. "Compassion is not the opposite of discipline, Your Grace. A tenant who cannot pay because he has gambled his rent is not the same as a widow who needs 10 days to sell livestock without losing half its value. A roof that can wait until spring is not the same as one that will ruin a beam before November." She glanced toward the bridge. "You cannot govern all 3 by calling them sentiment, and you believe Croft has done that." "I believe Mr. Croft likes decisions that can be made without listening." Henry let out a breath through his nose. "That is an accusation." "No, it is an observation." He almost smiled. This time he did. Briefly. Lydia saw it and seemed more startled by that than she had been by his anger. They walked back toward the lane. Henry no longer offered his hand unless the ground required it. The previous day's small contact had altered something between them, but not enough to justify repetition for its own sake. He found himself noticing her pace instead, noticing when she slowed to examine a broken ditch wall, noticing that she greeted tenant children by name, noticing that no one behaved toward her as though she had ever required a title to possess authority. At the gig, Lydia stopped. "If I continue helping you, there must be a condition." Henry looked at her. "You are in an unusual position to impose one. Then perhaps that is healthy for you." He raised an eyebrow. "What is it? The tenants are not to be treated as suspects because they spoke to me. They are withholding rent. They are withholding delivery of rent. You know the distinction now. Yes. If you begin questioning them as conspirators, every honest answer will become an act of fear." Henry considered this. Croft had already called their action coordinated defiance. 3 days ago, Henry might have accepted that description without examination. "No tenant is to be punished for speaking truthfully about estate business," he said. "Not only punished," Lydia held his gaze. "Do not frighten them into silence and then congratulate yourself because no one lied." The words struck cleanly. Henry nodded. "You have my word." Something in her face eased. Not trust, but perhaps the beginning of permission for trust to exist. They rode back toward Rosemead in separate conveyances. By the time they reached the long drive, afternoon had softened the light over with the western fields. Henry should have been thinking about Croft. Instead, he found himself thinking about the day Lydia had left Cedar Cottage, about the keys placed beside his authorization, about her refusal of the servants' wing. Miss Mercer, her gig had slowed beside his horse, where the drive widened. Lydia looked up. "Yes, Your Grace." He had not intended to speak. That made what came next more honest. "When this is finished, do you mean to remain in Hampshire?" Her expression changed. The question hung between them with far more intimacy than the setting allowed. Henry tightened his hand on the reins. "I ask because you have every reason to leave. That is true." He waited. Lydia looked toward Rosemead Hall in the distance. "I have not decided." The answer should have satisfied him. It did not. "I find," Henry said carefully, "that I dislike the possibility." She turned back to him. For once, Lydia Mercer had no immediate reply. Henry felt exposed in a way he had not felt while admitting his father's failures. He almost withdrew the statement. He did not. Lydia's voice, when it came, was gentler. "You have known me very little, Your Grace. That appears to be one of my more serious errors." Their eyes held for a moment. Then she looked ahead. "I still have not decided." "No," he inclined his head. "I understood you the first time." They continued toward the house. Neither saw Fabian Croft standing at an upper estate office window. He had seen the Duke return from Shaw's holding. He had also seen Lydia riding alongside him. Within 20 minutes, Croft summoned his under-agent. A packet of sealed tenancy notices was already waiting on the desk. "You will deliver these before nightfall," Croft said. The man hesitated. His Grace ordered no notices to quit. Croft tapped one finger against the packet. "These are not notices to quit. Not yet." He pushed them forward. "And you will not trouble His Grace with distinctions he has suddenly become too sentimental to understand." The under-agent took the packet. A quarter of an hour later, a horse left Rosemead by the East Drive, carrying the first of the notices toward Little Hensley. By Sunday morning, the first notices had done what Fabian Croft intended. They had frightened people who had been angry before. Lydia knew it the moment she stepped out of Little Hensley Church. Mrs. Greeley was waiting near the lich gate with a folded paper crushed in one hand. Samuel Price stood beside her, pale with fury. 2 other tenants had gathered several paces away, speaking in low voices that stopped when Lydia appeared. No one greeted her. That was worse. Mrs. Greeley held out the paper. "Is this because of you?" Lydia took it. The sheet bore Rosemead's estate heading. Beneath it, in formal language, the tenant's temporary refusal to surrender rent was described as an aggravated default requiring immediate correction. A second paragraph warned that continued defiance might affect future indulgence in matters of repair, arrears, and renewal. The final memorandum was shorter. Miss Mercer's private assurances cannot alter the obligations of any tenant under the Duke's authority. Lydia read it twice. Her stomach tightened. I gave no private assurance. Samuel stepped forward. You told us to pay. I told you your rent was owed. That isn't what this says. No. Mrs. Greeley's mouth trembled. My lease has 2 years left. Lydia looked at her. You have not received a notice to quit. Not yet. The fear in those words changed the shape of the morning. More people had begun leaving the churchyard. Some paused when they saw the paper in Lydia's hand. Others moved closer. Thomas Bell came through the gate last. He looked from Mrs. Greeley to Lydia. What has Croft done? Samuel answered before Lydia could. He says she put us up to it. I did not. Thomas nodded once. We know. Mrs. Greeley did not look convinced. Lydia folded the paper carefully along its existing crease. Listen to me. The small group quieted. You owe your rent. A man near the wall muttered. We know that. I am saying it again, because no one will later claim I told you otherwise. Several faces turned toward her. You chose to withhold delivery until His Grace heard you. That choice was yours. I did not ask for it. I did not promise protection in return. Samuel frowned. Are you saying we should give in? I am saying you must decide what risk belongs to you. Thomas watched her closely. Lydia continued. I will not ask Mrs. Greeley to wager her home for my pride. I will not ask Samuel to wager his farm. If any of you decide today that you have been heard enough and wish to pay, I will not think less of you. The silence changed again. It lost some of its heat. That mattered. A tenant named Mr. Shaw stepped forward. What would you do? Lydia looked at the notice in her hand. If it were my tenancy, I would want to know why a warning bearing Rosemead's authority was prepared before the Duke had finished hearing us. Thomas's eyes narrowed. Prepared when? Lydia turned the sheet over. There was a docketing date near the bottom. Her breath caught. The notice had been drafted the morning of the first rent refusal, earlier than it should have been possible. Before Henry had left Rosemead for Mrs. Pritchard's house. Before he had begun asking why. Before he had ordered that no tenant be threatened. Samuel saw her expression. What? Lydia folded the paper again. I do not know yet. A carriage sounded beyond the church wall. Heads turned. The Bellcaster arms appeared first on the door panel. Henry stepped down before the footman could fully lower the step. He saw the gathering. Then the paper in Lydia's hand. His face changed. Miss Mercer, Your Grace. He crossed the churchyard quickly, but not carelessly. Thomas Bell bowed. Others followed. Henry did not ask them to disperse. What happened? Lydia held out Mrs. Greeley's notice. He took it. His eyes moved down the page. She watched the exact moment he reached the memorandum bearing her name. His expression hardened. I did not authorize this. Mrs. Greeley spoke from behind Lydia. Does it still count, Your Grace? Henry looked at her. No notice to quit has my approval. Croft had been clever. Henry glanced at the heading again. This is not a notice to quit. No, Your Grace, Lydia said. But it was meant to sound close enough. His gaze met hers. He understood. Henry turned to the tenants. This paper is withdrawn pending review. Samuel said, all of them. All notices concerning this rent dispute. And if Mr. Croft says otherwise, he will answer to me. That produced a visible release of tension through the group. Not relief enough to restore trust, but enough to stop panic. Henry looked again at the sheet. When did you receive these? Mrs. Greeley answered. Last evening. Who delivered them? Mr. Croft's under agent. Henry folded the paper and handed it back to Lydia rather than keeping it. For the moment, retain this. She nodded. It was not evidence transferred into his control. That, too, mattered. He addressed the tenants once more. No one will lose a tenancy merely because he or she asked to be heard. If further papers arrive, bring them directly to Rosemead or to Miss Mercer before acting upon them. Lydia looked at him sharply. Henry corrected himself at once. If Miss Mercer is willing, the adjustment was small. She noticed it anyway. I am willing to read them, she said, not command anyone's decision. Understood. Thomas Bell removed his hat. That will do for today, Your Grace. It was not gratitude. It was conditional approval. Henry accepted it as such. The tenants began to disperse. Mrs. Greeley took Lydia's hands for a moment, then released them without speaking. Samuel followed Thomas toward the lane. Soon only Lydia and Henry remained near the church wall. She still held the notice. Her fingers had begun to tremble. Not badly enough, Henry saw. He did not reach for her. May I? Lydia looked at him. His hand was open between them, not extended like a command, offered. The memory of the rutted farm lane passed through her with surprising clarity. This time the ground beneath her was firm. She placed her hand in his anyway. Henry's fingers closed around hers. Warm, steady. He did not squeeze. He simply held on. Longer than propriety required. Long enough for the trembling to ease. Lydia looked down at their joined hands. You were quick. I was not quick enough to prevent this. No. He accepted the answer. After a moment, she raised her eyes. There is something you need to see. She gave him the notice with her free hand and pointed to the docketing date. Henry read it. His thumb went still against the paper. This was prepared before I returned from the rent room. Yes, his face lost all softness. That means Croft expected resistance, or intended to create the appearance of it. Henry released her hand only then. Not abruptly. Carefully, he looked toward Rosemead, beyond the village roofs. For the first time since the tenants had closed their purses, the question was no longer whether Fabian Croft had mishandled the estate. It was how early he had decided that Lydia Mercer would be blamed for whatever happened next. Henry sent for Lydia the following afternoon, not to the drawing room, not to the estate office where Croft still had access. He received her in the small library overlooking Rosemead's south lawn, with the doors open to daylight and Mrs. Pritchard waiting in the adjoining morning room by prior arrangement. The precautions did not escape Lydia, neither did the papers on Henry's desk. Mrs. Greeley's notice lay among them. Lydia had brought it herself after copying its wording and date. Beside it rested Henry's original instruction suspending punitive action. He stood when she entered. Miss Mercer, Your Grace. For a moment, Henry said nothing. Then he gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. Lydia sat. He remained standing. I have been thinking about Cedar Cottage. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly. Henry continued. The sale has been halted. Nothing further will be removed. The cottage can be restored to you immediately. Lydia's hands remained folded in her lap. He had expected surprise, perhaps relief. Neither came. Your former salary will also be restored, he said, and your position. Formally this time, no ambiguity. Still she said nothing. Henry felt the first stirrings of unease. I can have the rooms put back in order before the end of the week. No, the word was quiet. Henry stopped. Lydia looked directly at him. No, Your Grace. He had faced hostile creditors with less difficulty than he faced that answer. You do not wish to return. I do not wish to return on those terms. I have just offered you more security than you had before. You have offered me what you took. Henry's mouth tightened. That seems a reasonable beginning. A beginning, perhaps. She rose. Not in anger. That made it harder. You believe the problem is that I lost Cedar Cottage. I believe that is part of it. It is. She moved toward the window, then stopped before propriety could make the distance between them too informal. The larger problem is that you were able to remove everything in a morning because none of it was truly mine. Henry said nothing. My salary existed because your steward allowed it to exist. My office existed because your father had once found it useful. My lodging depended upon the estate. My work had no defined authority, no protection, no written independence. You would have those things now. Because you are sorry. The words landed without cruelty. Henry looked at her. Lydia continued. What happens when you are no longer sorry? His face hardened. You think so little of my word? I think your word has enormous power. She held his gaze. That is precisely the difficulty. Silence settled between them. Lydia's voice softened. Tomorrow you might change your mind. Or you might die and leave Bellcaster to a man who thinks as you did a month ago. Or another Mr. Croft may tell another Duke that my work is sentimental and unnecessary. Henry looked toward the papers on his desk. For the first time, he saw the offer he had prepared from her side, not restoration. Dependence returned with better manners. I thought, he said slowly, that giving back what I took was the same as repairing what I did. Lydia did not answer. Henry looked at her again. It is not. No, he absorbed that. Then, because there was no honorable way around it, he said, I decided what your security should look like without asking you. Her expression changed. Very slightly. I did it when I dismissed you. I nearly did it again today. Yes, I am sorry. Not for Croft. Not for misunderstanding. For his own act. Lydia inclined her head. I believe you. That was not forgiveness. Henry understood the distinction now. He did not move toward her. He did not ask her to reconsider. Instead, he said, Then tell me what I should do next. Lydia's eyes narrowed faintly. You are asking? I am attempting to learn. For the first time that afternoon, warmth almost entered her expression. Then begin by proving what happened to those notices. Henry nodded. And Cedar Cottage? Leave it empty. He nearly smiled. That will pain Croft more than restoring it. That is not why I asked, no. The smile vanished, I know. By dusk, Lydia was walking back toward Mrs. Pritchard's house when Fabian Croft stepped from the covered passage beside the old tithe barn. She stopped at once. He carried no ledger. That made him look less official and more dangerous. Miss Mercer. Mr. Croft, I hoped we might speak privately. We are speaking where anyone passing the lane may see us. His jaw tightened. Very well. He produced a folded paper from inside his coat. I have no interest in prolonging an unfortunate dispute. Nor do I. I can arrange a generous payment. Lydia stared at him. For what? For inconvenience. Loss of position, removal expenses, call it what you like. And what would you call it? Croft's expression cooled. A practical solution. He held out the paper. Lydia did not take it immediately. What must I do in return? Leave Bellcaster. There it was. And stop encouraging questions. I have encouraged accuracy. You have encouraged disorder. I told the tenants their rent was owed. Yes, and now His Grace rides from farm to farm, asking whether his own steward is a thief. Lydia's pulse quickened. Croft knew more than Henry had openly accused him of. How much are you offering? Croft mistook the question for interest. Enough to establish you comfortably elsewhere. I will also provide a favorable reference. Lydia held out her hand. Let me see. He gave her the paper. She read it beneath the fading light. Payment, reference, departure within 7 days, and near the bottom, one sentence. In consideration of Miss Mercer's relinquishment of all connection to the Cedar Cottage office, its papers, effects, and attendant estate arrangements, Lydia went still. The phrasing, almost the same as the disposal notation Henry had shown her. Office, papers, effects, attendant arrangements. Croft watched her too closely. Well, Lydia folded the paper. I will not take your money. His face changed, she continued. And I will not leave Hampshire because you find questions inconvenient. That document is mine. No, you have refused the offer. I have, then return it. Lydia stepped backward toward the open lane. You gave it to me. Miss Mercer. A cart appeared at the far bend. Croft saw it too. His voice lowered. You do not understand what you are doing. Lydia tucked the folded offer securely inside her reticule. No, Mr. Croft. She met his eyes. I think I finally do. Then she walked toward little Hensley without looking back. Lydia did not show Croft's offer to Henry that night. She showed it to him the next morning, not alone. Mrs. Pritchard sat in the corner of Rosemead's small morning room with her knitting. Beside the window stood Mr. Elias Wren, a solicitor's clerk from Winchester, whom Henry had sent for after realizing that too many estate papers had passed through hands already compromised by Croft. Lydia placed the folded offer on the table between them. Henry read it once, then again. His face gave away very little until he reached the final paragraph. In consideration of Miss Mercer's relinquishment of all connection to the Cedar Cottage office, its papers, effects, and attendant estate arrangements. Lydia nodded. That phrasing is familiar. Yes. Henry looked toward Mr. Wren. The clerk leaned closer but did not touch the page. Your Grace, there was similar language on the disposal schedule. The schedule still remains in Rosemead custody. Yes, and this letter? Henry looked at Lydia rather than answering for her. A few weeks earlier, he would not have noticed the significance of that. Lydia did. It is mine at present, she said. Mr. Wren inclined his head. Then, if you wish it preserved as evidence, Miss Mercer, I would advise transferring it formally into neutral custody. I do. Henry said nothing. That silence felt deliberate. Lydia turned toward him. There is something else. He waited. When Cedar Cottage was used as an office, counterpart copies were kept there. Henry frowned. Counterparts of what? Administrative instructions, tenancy correspondence, some internal schedules, not originals. Copies for reference. Croft knew this. He knew the practice existed. I do not know whether he remembered which papers remained when the office was closed. Mr. Wren straightened. Is the cottage still sealed? Henry nodded. Nothing has been removed since I halted the sale. Lydia looked at him. I want to go back. His answer came immediately. Yes. Then he stopped himself. Lydia almost smiled. Henry corrected the instinct. If you wish to go back, I will arrange access. That is what I wish. Then you shall choose who accompanies you. She looked toward Mr. Wren, the clerk. Henry's expression flickered. And me. You may come. It was permission, not command. He accepted it as such. Cedar Cottage smelled of dust and cold ashes. The rooms had not changed since Lydia left, which somehow made them harder to enter. The front room stood almost bare now that several pieces had been moved to the halted sale yard. Pale rectangles marked the walls where shelves had been. Her desk remained, but the 2 blue chairs were gone. She did not look for them. Not yet. Mr. Wren examined the cupboard beside the desk, while Henry remained near the doorway, giving Lydia space. The copies were not kept there, she said. She crossed to the lower shelves built into the wall. During wet weather, paper had sometimes warped near the window. Years earlier, she had begun placing the least frequently used counterpart bundles on the lowest shelf behind a removable board. She knelt. Henry moved instinctively, then stopped. Lydia noticed. She loosened the small brass catch herself. The panel resisted. Mr. Wren came forward. Allow me. Together they drew it free. Behind it lay 3 thin bundles tied with cotton tape. Lydia felt her pulse quicken. Those. Mr. Wren carried them to the desk. They opened the first. Repairs. The second. Petitions. The third contained internal estate instructions and copies of disposal schedules. Henry stood opposite Lydia as Mr. Wren carefully separated the sheets. There, she said. The counterpart of the Cedar Cottage disposal instruction lay halfway down. Henry's signature appeared at the foot. Lydia read the body. Closure of the Cedar Cottage office. Termination of Miss Mercer's position. Removal and disposal of non-essential furnishings. Her throat tightened. It was exactly what Henry had admitted to doing. Then, in a different hand near the bottom, came an additional notation. Office papers, effects, and attendant arrangements to pass with the premises without separate consideration. Mr. Wren examined it. The handwriting differs. Henry's jaw hardened. Yes, Lydia looked at him. This does not make you innocent. He met her eyes. No. The answer came without hesitation. I signed the closure. I dismissed you. I approved the furniture sale. Mr. Wren glanced between them, then wisely returned his attention to the paper. Henry continued. Croft made it uglier. I made it possible. Lydia had not expected the words to affect her as strongly as they did. Not because they erased anything, because he did not try to use new evidence to escape old guilt. A knock sounded at the open door. An elderly man stood there in an auctioneer's dark coat, hat held before him. Henry recognized him. Mr. Pike. The man bowed. Your Grace, Mr. Wren asked whether I would identify the lot instructions. Mr. Wren gestured him forward. Did Mr. Croft direct the arrangement of Cedar Cottage's contents? He did. The chairs, Mr. Pike gave Lydia a quick, embarrassed glance. Yes, sir. Were they required to remain with the office effects? I asked whether they might be separated. They were decent chairs, could have made a separate lot. And Mr. Croft said everything connected to Miss Mercer's office was to go together. His exact words were, keep the whole arrangement in one lot and be done with it. Silence followed. Henry's face had gone very still. Mr. Wren folded the counterpart carefully. This should leave the cottage now. Lydia nodded. Into your custody. Agreed. She handed him Croft's written offer as well, Mr. Wren made a note of both transfers before placing them into his document case. Only after the case was closed did Lydia realize Henry was watching her. Not the evidence. Her. You chose correctly, he said. I chose neutral custody. Yes. Something in his tone made clear that he understood the difference. They stepped outside while Mr. Wren finished his inventory. The lane was quiet. Henry stood beside Lydia without speaking. You could say the added wording proves Croft intended the humiliation, she said. It does, and that you did not. I did not intend that particular humiliation. She turned toward him. But intention is a poor defense when one has the power to ask and does not. Lydia's expression softened before she could prevent it. Henry looked away first. That small restraint touched her more than certainty would have. She reached out. Her gloved fingers rested lightly against his sleeve. Henry went still. She had never initiated contact before. The moment lasted only a breath. Then Lydia withdrew her hand. From the road beyond the cottage came the sound of a horse approaching at speed. A young estate servant appeared around the bend, breathless and frightened. Your Grace. Henry stepped forward. What is it? More notices, sir, sent out this morning. Henry's face changed. By whom? The servant swallowed. Mr. Croft's under-agent says they were prepared earlier, before the order came down. Lydia looked toward the closed document case inside Cedar Cottage. Croft had lost control of the papers, so he had moved to the tenants instead. By noon, Henry had stopped sending messages and begun delivering them himself. The first farm belonged to Mrs. Greeley. He arrived without the ceremonial weight of a ducal visit. One groom rode behind him. No steward, no clerk, no carriage bearing attendants who might turn apology into spectacle. Mrs. Greeley came to the door with the new notice still in her hand. She looked startled when she saw him. Your Grace, Henry dismounted. May I see it? She gave him the paper. The wording was more severe than the earlier warning. It referred to persistent default, future consideration of tenancy terms, and the estate's right to act where obligations remained deliberately unmet. At the bottom sat the date, prepared 2 days before Croft's authority had been curtailed. Delivered that morning, Henry folded the paper once. This notice is withdrawn. Mrs. Greeley did not immediately look relieved. Mr. Croft's man said it came from Rosemead. It did. Her eyes lifted to his. Henry could have said Croft acted without permission. That would have been true. It would also have been incomplete. The authority used to issue it came from my household, he said. Mr. Croft abused that authority, but I gave him too much freedom to act without scrutiny. That failure is mine. Mrs. Greeley stared at him. A duke did not often arrive at a tenant's door to explain his own failure. Henry suspected that was part of the problem. No action will be taken against your tenancy because you participated in the rent refusal, he continued. If anyone tells you otherwise, send word directly to Rosemead. She looked down at the notice. And the rent? It remains owed. Yes, Your Grace. I know you know that. For the first time, something eased in her face. Henry returned the paper. Keep it, she blinked. For what? So no one may later pretend it was never sent. He rode next to Samuel Price's holding, then to Shaw's, then to North Farm. At each place, the pattern repeated, a warning delivered, a frightened household, a tenant who had begun to wonder whether loyalty to Lydia had been foolish. And at each place, Henry said the same essential thing. The notice was withdrawn. The debt remained. No tenancy would be forfeited merely because the tenant had insisted on being heard. He did not blame Croft without naming his own responsibility. By late afternoon, mud marked the hem of Henry's riding coat, and his horse had to be exchanged at Rosemead before the final 2 farms. Lydia learned where he had gone from Thomas Bell. She did not join him. That mattered. Henry was not performing the visits for her to witness. By the time he returned to Rosemead after dusk, every notice known to have been delivered had been personally countermanded. Croft was waiting in the estate office. Henry entered still wearing his riding boots. Croft stood behind the desk. You have spent the entire day undermining your own authority. Henry removed his gloves. No. Croft's mouth tightened. You have ridden farm to farm, apologizing to tenants who are withholding rent. I have corrected notices issued under my name without my present consent. They were prepared before your order and delivered afterward. Croft said nothing. Henry stepped closer. You knew I had forbidden intimidation. I knew you had become uncertain. Do not confuse restraint with uncertainty. Croft's composure slipped. Your Grace, if you continue allowing Miss Mercer to dictate estate policy. She has dictated nothing. She has turned every farmer on this land against me. You accomplished that yourself. Croft's jaw hardened. Henry continued. Your authority is suspended entirely until the rent audit. Croft went still. You cannot mean, I do. I have served Bellcaster for 11 years. And tomorrow you may explain those 11 years before the records. Croft's face whitened. I demand the opportunity to clear my name. You shall have it. Henry's voice remained cold. The audit will be witnessed. The documents will be present. So will Miss Mercer, if she chooses to attend. Croft laughed once. Of course, with her convenient counterpart paper. Henry's eyes narrowed. Croft saw it and pressed harder. A sheet discovered in the very cottage she occupied. In a hiding place only she remembered. How fortunate. The accusation settled into the room. Henry did not answer immediately. Then he said, make that claim at the audit. Croft stared at him. I intend to. Good. Henry turned toward the door. Until then, you will issue nothing, sign nothing, and instruct no under-agent. Croft's voice followed him. You are risking Bellcaster for that woman. Henry stopped. He looked back. No, Croft. His expression was almost calm. I risked Bellcaster when I believed a man in an office knew more about my tenants than the people standing at their doors. That evening, Lydia found Henry in the small library. Mrs. Pritchard had accompanied her to Rosemead, but remained downstairs with tea and a book, close enough to satisfy propriety and far enough to leave them a few minutes of privacy. Henry stood beside the fire. He looked tired, not wounded, not defeated, simply stripped of the distance he usually wore like another coat. I heard where you went, Lydia said. He gave a humorless half smile. Apparently every tenant in Hampshire now knows where I went. Not Hampshire. Only Bellcaster, then. She stepped farther into the room. Mrs. Greeley sent word. Henry looked at her. She was frightened. I know. You did not send a clerk. No. You went yourself. Yes. The silence between them was different now, not strained. Full. Lydia said, you could have blamed Croft. I did blame him, only partly. Henry looked toward the fire. He misused authority I gave him. That is not the same as saying you intended what he did. No, he turned back to her, but I am tired of using intention as though it were absolution. Lydia said nothing. Henry's voice lowered. I thought being Duke meant I was responsible for decisions. He gave a faint shake of his head. I am beginning to understand it means I am responsible for what my decisions permit as well. Something in Lydia's chest tightened. He took one step toward her, then stopped before the distance became presumption. You have become more necessary to my heart than I know how to bear. Lydia went very still. Henry did not move closer. He did not ask for an answer. He did not offer marriage, safety, position, or restoration. He simply stood there, exposed by the truth of what he had said. Lydia crossed the space between them. She put her arms around him. Henry did not immediately return the embrace. For one heartbeat, then another, he let her choose it fully. Only when Lydia held him more tightly did his arms come around her, carefully, as though he understood that receiving affection was not the same as claiming it. Her cheek rested against his coat. She heard his breath leave him slowly. Neither spoke. They did not need to. When Lydia finally stepped back, Henry released her at once. The distance returned, but not the old distance. A knock sounded at the library door. Henry's secretary entered with a sealed note. Your Grace, from Mr. Croft. Henry broke the seal. Lydia watched his expression harden as he read. What is it? He handed her the note. Croft demanded that the coming rent audit formally clear his reputation. Beneath that, in sharper language, he stated his intention to prove that Lydia Mercer had fabricated the counterpart paper discovered at Cedar Cottage. Lydia finished reading. Henry looked at her. He means to make you the fraud. She folded the note once. Then he had better be very certain I cannot prove otherwise. The 2 blue chairs were already waiting in the old estate hall when Lydia arrived. For a moment, she stopped in the doorway. Someone had brought them back from the halted sale and set them beside the long rent table, exactly as they had once stood at Cedar Cottage. One faced the room. The other faced it, not one above the other. Thomas Bell stood nearby with his purse in his hand. We thought they belonged here today, he said. Lydia touched the worn back of the nearest chair. Yes, she said, I think they do. The hall filled slowly. Tenant farmers came first, then widows holding leases in their own names, 2 estate clerks, the auctioneer's clerk, and Mr. Elias Wren with his document case. Henry had invited no crowd from London, no fashionable spectators, no audience whose applause might turn justice into entertainment. The people present had something at stake. Fabian Croft entered last. He wore black and carried himself as though he were attending someone else's judgment. Henry stood at the head of the rent table. He did not sit. Neither did Lydia. Croft looked at the blue chairs and gave a humorless smile. Sentiment again. Thomas Bell's expression hardened. Henry said, Sit down, Croft. I would prefer to stand. As you wish. Mr. Wren opened his case. The first paper placed on the table was Henry's original authorization. No one pretended it was forged. Henry looked across the hall. This bears my signature. I authorized the closing of the Cedar Cottage office, the dismissal of Miss Mercer, and the disposal of its non-essential furnishings. A murmur moved through the tenants. Henry did not soften the statement. Croft seized upon it. Precisely. His Grace made the decision. I administered it. Lydia saw several tenants glance at Henry. He remained still. Mr. Wren produced the counterpart copy recovered from Cedar Cottage. Croft's expression changed only slightly. The clerk explained what it showed. The same authorized closure, the same dismissal. Then the added wording concerning office papers, effects, and attendant arrangements. Croft laughed. A convenient discovery. Mr. Wren looked at him. Do you deny the handwriting resembles yours? I deny that a paper found in Miss Mercer's former office proves anything about when the words were written. Croft turned toward the tenants. Consider the circumstances. Miss Mercer loses her place. 3 weeks later, she discovers a document that makes her dismissal appear more degrading than His Grace intended. Lydia felt the accusations settle over the room. Not everyone believed him. That did not matter. He needed only enough doubt. Croft continued. She has already persuaded tenants to withhold rents. Now she produces papers from a hiding place only she knew existed. Henry's gaze shifted toward Lydia. Not suspicious, waiting. That distinction steadied her. Mr. Wren said, "The auctioneer's clerk is present." Mr. Pike stepped forward. Croft barely looked at him. The older man testified that Croft had ordered Lydia's office effects kept together as a single lot and had rejected the suggestion that the 2 chairs be separated for sale. Croft shrugged. That is ordinary administrative efficiency. Even when Miss Mercer's personal working effects were mixed with estate furniture, Lydia asked. Croft looked at her. "You are not conducting this audit." "No." Her voice remained calm. "I am asking one question." Henry said nothing. He let her continue. Lydia turned toward Mr. Wren. "The letter, please, Mr." Wren produced Croft's written offer and placed it before him. Croft's face lost color. "Only a little. Enough." Lydia did not touch the page. "You gave me this after His Grace offered to restore Cedar Cottage." Croft said, "I offered compensation to end unnecessary disruption. You offered money if I left Bellcaster, a perfectly respectable settlement, and stopped answering questions. That is your interpretation?" Lydia nodded. Then she looked toward Mr. Wren. "Read the final paragraph." The clerk did. The words carried clearly through the hall. "In consideration of Miss Mercer's relinquishment of all connection to the Cedar Cottage office, its papers, effects, and attendant estate arrangements," Thomas Bell's head came up. Lydia turned back to Croft. "You claim I altered the counterpart paper after it was found." "I do, and that the wording on it came from me." Croft hesitated. "That is the implication." "Then why does your private offer, written before the counterpart was discovered, use the same unusual phrase?" Silence. Croft's mouth opened, closed. Lydia continued. "You wrote papers, effects, and attendant estate arrangements before anyone outside Cedar Cottage had seen the counterpart copy." Mr. Wren looked toward Henry. Henry did not intervene. Lydia's voice remained almost gentle. "How did I copy language from a document you say I fabricated later when you had already used that language yourself?" Croft's face reddened. "That proves nothing. Clerical language repeats. One phrase might." Lydia looked toward the remaining papers. 3 may not." Mr. Wren placed one of the predated notices beside the offer. The same administrative phrasing appeared again. Croft began speaking more quickly. "Standard office language. Anyone familiar with estate correspondence?" Mr. Wren interrupted for the first time. "The date on this notice precedes His Grace's first suspension order." "Yes, and the remaining notices were delivered after you knew he had forbidden intimidation." Croft's eyes shifted toward Henry. "Prepared lawfully before the order, delivered lawfully afterward?" Henry asked. Croft said nothing. The room had turned against him, but Lydia knew Henry did not want indignation alone. Neither did she. Mr. Wren produced the final item, Samuel Price's roof petition. Beside it lay the £12 estimate and the later £36 repair charge. Henry said, "We examined no wider account today because one provable transaction is enough to establish why further accounts will be reviewed." Croft's composure cracked. "This is absurd. A delayed repair becomes more expensive." "That is hardly fraud." "No," Lydia said. "Delay alone is not." Croft looked at her. She pointed toward the petition. "But the later charge includes timber from the East Wood." Mr. Pike's assistant, summoned only for that narrow fact, confirmed the estate had supplied that timber from its own stock. Lydia asked, "Then why was the estate charged again for purchasing it?" Croft stared at the paper. No answer came. Henry stepped forward. "That will be investigated separately by my solicitors." Croft looked around the hall. You cannot mean to dismiss me over the complaints of people who are themselves refusing lawful rent." Henry's expression changed. For the first time that day, he looked less like a man conducting an audit than a duke fully aware of his authority. "I am dismissing you because you misrepresented petitions, issued coercive notices, against my express direction, manipulated the disposal of an office for your own convenience, attempted to buy Miss Mercer's departure, and cannot explain a charge now shown to be false." Croft's face had gone grey. "You trusted me." "Yes." Henry's voice was quiet. "That was one of my failures." The tenants became very still. Henry turned away from Croft. He faced them. What Mr. Croft did was wrong. No one moved. But I will not hide behind his wrongdoing. Lydia watched him. Henry continued. "I signed the order that dismissed Miss Mercer. I closed an office without asking what work it performed. I governed this estate through reports because reports were easier than people." Thomas Bell lowered his eyes. Henry looked at the two blue chairs. "I allowed a system in which a tenant might be heard only because one woman chose to listen without being given proper authority to do so." Then he looked at Lydia. "That was not Mr. Croft's decision. The room seemed to contract around them. It was mine." Lydia felt something loosen inside her. Not because he had defended her, because he had refused the easy version of innocence. Henry turned back to the tenants. "Beginning next month, Rosemead will hold a stated petition morning. Serious complaints will be entered in duplicate, with a receipt given to the tenant. No notice to quit will be issued by a steward or under agent without my countersignature." Thomas Bell looked toward Lydia. Henry did too. "Miss Mercer has been offered a salaried position, overseeing tenant correspondence and petition review, with duties defined in writing and no dependence upon residence at Cedar Cottage." Lydia heard several breaths drawn. Henry added, "She is free to refuse." Every eye turned toward her. This time the room did not feel like a sale yard. Lydia looked first at the tenants, then at Henry. "I accept." Thomas Bell opened his rent purse. One by one, others followed. Coins and notes passed across the table. No cheering came. No one needed it. By dusk, the hall was empty. The blue chairs remained. Lydia stood beside them while Henry closed the final rent book. "Miss Mercer." She turned. He approached slowly. "There is one matter I did not wish to place before an audience. That is promising." A faint smile touched his mouth. Then it vanished. "I would like permission to court you." Lydia looked at him. "As Duke of Bellcaster?" "No, as the man who dismissed me, if you can bear the disadvantage." Her lips curved. Henry's voice softened. As Henry, he held out his hand. Lydia placed hers in it. This time there was no mud to cross, no frightened tenant watching, no trembling to steady, only choice. Henry looked down at their joined hands and then back at her. "I love you, Lydia." The words were simple. That made them harder to doubt. She stepped closer. "And I love you, Henry." His breath caught. He did not take what the confession seemed to offer. "May I kiss you?" "Yes." Lydia lifted her face. Henry kissed her gently. No desperation, no claim, only warmth, restraint, and the quiet astonishment of two people who had finally learned the difference between being needed and being chosen. When they parted, Lydia did not let go of his hand. Across the room, the two faded blue chairs waited beside the empty rent table. For once, neither of them belonged to the person with the greater power. They were simply places where someone had agreed to listen. By February, Rosemead had learned how to function without depending upon Lydia Mercer's willingness to repair every failure quietly. That pleased her more than any public apology could have done. The first stated petition morning had been awkward. The second had been crowded. By the fourth, the process had become ordinary. Tenants arrived at the East Office with written complaints where they could manage them, and spoken ones where they could not. Each serious matter was entered twice. One copy remained with the estate. The other, signed and dated, went home with the person who had brought it. No steward could later claim the matter had never existed. Lydia sat at her own desk beneath a tall window overlooking Rosemead's kitchen garden. Her salary was paid independently of any lodging. Her duties were written. Her right to refer disputed matters directly to Henry was written too. Most satisfying of all, she had disagreed with him twice in the previous month. Both times, the walls had remained standing. The Duke of Bellcaster had even survived. Mrs. Greeley's drainage request, Henry asked from the opposite side of her desk one morning. Approved. I thought you said the lower field could wait until spring. It could. Then the frost shifted the culvert. Henry glanced at the papers. So you changed your judgment? Yes, he looked up. Should I pretend to be shocked? You might struggle to make it convincing. His mouth curved. Their courtship had changed him in smaller ways than scandal ever could. He still rode the estate himself more often than before. He still read reports. He still preferred figures that balanced and decisions that could be defended. But he asked different questions now. Who had been heard? Who had not? What had changed since the last inspection? And occasionally, when Lydia disagreed with him, he asked the most difficult question of all. Why Fabian Croft no longer worked anywhere near Bellcaster. The final review of his accounts had uncovered enough false charges and improper payments to make denial pointless. Through solicitors, a settlement had been reached, requiring restitution of the sums that could be proved. His dismissal carried no favorable reference, and among landowners who depended upon reputation in their agents, that consequence was nearly as decisive as law. Henry had not celebrated it, neither had Lydia. Justice did not require delight. It required an ending. Croft had one. So did the tenants' rent dispute. Every withheld rent had been paid in full after the audit. No family had been evicted for participating. Repairs had resumed according to need rather than favor. Thomas Bell had even complained, with considerable satisfaction, that the new system produced so many receipts a man could scarcely lose an argument properly. The blue chairs had returned too. A local upholsterer had repaired the webbing and replaced what could no longer be saved. But Lydia insisted that the faded blue fabric remain wherever possible. They need not be made new, she had told Henry. They have survived. One stood beside her desk, the other faced it. That afternoon, the last petitioner left just before 4. Lydia signed the second copy of a boundary drain complaint, handed it to the tenant, and watched him tuck it carefully inside his coat. Thank you, Miss Mercer. You are welcome, Mr. Hale. Mr. Doran will inspect the ditch before Tuesday. The man bowed. As the door closed behind him, Lydia leaned back for the first time in nearly 2 hours. You are tired. Henry's voice came from the doorway. She looked up. You have developed an alarming habit of entering rooms after everyone else has done the work. I am a duke. It is an ancient privilege. You may find it under review. He came inside, carrying no papers. That alone made Lydia suspicious. You are early. For supper. For whatever this is. Henry stopped beside the visitor's chair. During the months of their courtship, he had learned that Lydia disliked being surrounded when serious questions were asked. He had therefore never made a spectacle of his affection. No ballroom announcement. No strategic carriage ride through Mayfair. No family summoned to witness gratitude dressed as romance. He had simply come to Mrs. Pritchard's door when propriety required it, walked with Lydia when weather allowed, written when they could not meet, and permitted time to prove what urgency never could. Now he glanced at the chair. May I? Lydia smiled. That is where people with grievances sit. Excellent. Henry lowered himself into it. Lydia folded her hands on the desk. Well, I have a grievance against the estate, against its advisor. Serious, extremely. She tried not to smile again. Henry did not. That changed everything. He reached into his coat, but instead of producing a ring immediately, he rested his hands upon his knees. Lydia. She became still. I have spent months trying to determine how to ask this without making it sound like another arrangement Rosemead requires. Her expression softened. Henry continued, "The estate does not require you to marry me. No, it functions perfectly well when you contradict me from your own office. Better, some would say. I feared you might mention that." Then the humor left his face. "I am not asking because Bellcaster needs you. I am not asking because the tenants admire you. I am not asking because I owe you restitution." He rose. Lydia's breath caught. Henry came around the desk, but stopped before reaching her. "I am asking because when you are absent, I look for you, because when something absurd happens, you are the person I want to tell. Because you make me more truthful, and somehow you also make truth less lonely." His voice lowered. "I told you once that I loved you." Lydia stood. "I remember. I love you still more peacefully now, which is somehow worse." She laughed, softly. Henry smiled, but his eyes remained serious. "Will you marry me?" No audience waited. No tenant held a rent purse. No steward's future depended upon her answer. No house, salary, position, or reputation would vanish if she said no. That freedom was the gift he could finally give her. Lydia stepped closer. "Yes." Henry closed his eyes for one brief second. When he opened them, she was still smiling. "Yes," he repeated. "You heard me. I have learned the importance of accurate records. Then write it down." Instead, he held out his hand. Lydia placed hers in it. He lifted it gently. "May I kiss you?" She answered by moving closer first. Yes. His kiss was warm and unhurried. Lydia rested one hand against his shoulder and felt him smile against her mouth before he drew back. She did not release him. Neither did he release her. After a moment, Henry glanced toward the abandoned papers on her desk. "Now that we are engaged, may I make one request?" "That depends." "Supper." Lydia blinked. "Supper? You have kept me waiting for nearly 20 minutes. She looked at the clock. "You have been here 6. "I began suffering in advance," she laughed. Henry moved toward the opposite blue chair and sat as though settling himself before a magistrate. Lydia raised an eyebrow. "That chair is meant for people with grievances. I have stated mine, and what remedy do you seek?" "Your company in the dining room. A severe demand. I am prepared to negotiate." Lydia closed the final petition folder. The day's work was finished. She came around the desk and held out her hand. Henry looked at it before taking it. Always looking now, always allowing the choice to be visible. Their fingers joined between the 2 repaired blue chairs. Once, those chairs had stood in a sale yard as proof that someone powerful had failed to understand what could not be priced. Now they stood at equal height in a room where anyone might sit and be heard. Lydia squeezed Henry's hand. "Come along, Your Grace." He rose. "Am I forgiven for the supper grievance?" "No, terrible woman. You chose me." Henry bent and kissed her temple. "I did." Lydia turned toward him. "And I chose you." Then they left the petition room together, their hands still joined, while the 2 blue chairs remained behind them, facing one another in the quiet. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.